Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Michael, for joining me today. We've got a few things to talk about. I'm very keen to talk about your journey, the market, the legal market in Cape Town, and obviously I'm absolutely delighted that you can join us from your firm C&A Friedlander, who are one of our key sponsors at the upcoming African General Council Summit that we're hosting in Cape Town. So firstly, thanks very much for coming.
Rob, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to chat today and for the GC Summit next month. It's going to be very good. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Good man, good man. So cool. Well, look, we've obviously just been talking off camera, and I've got a couple of notes in front of me as well. But and I see that you've got quite a long history in before being a lawyer in the radio and podcasting and emceeing world, which I will note for future events. So be careful. We'll pay you handsomely if we. Look, I mean, there's a couple of things that I really would love to get your input on. Firstly, whilst we as a group, the GRM group, we focus primarily on recruitment and executive search at the partner level, and we, as I was telling you off camera, we do a lot of management consulting work with small to medium-sized law firms as well. I'm very fascinated by the candidate attorney space because I've been reading a lot of statistics, especially in South Africa, and you obviously have a little bit of a more recent journey in that space. So. And of course, you just said off camera as well that you started it in COVID. So how was your journey getting those articles, and was it difficult during the COVID times?
In very short, very tough. So I was at UCT, and what you call the big firms, they hire people, candidates, at least 2 years in advance.
Yeah.
So while you're still studying, for some people who are doing their postgrad degree, that's in their first year of studies. So it's quite a tricky thing to hire a candidate when they're only 6 months into their law degree. So that's a whole different ballgame. But when you're applying for articles in Cape Town particularly, because that's my experience, it's extremely tough. I think there aren't enough jobs in Cape Town, and everyone's fighting for positions. And if I think about the big firms who, let's say, I know Joburg's bigger than Cape Town, but if you're looking at your so-called top 5 firms who might be hiring anywhere between 10 to 15 candidates per year, we're talking first-year candidate attorneys. During COVID, when I was applying, my first year was in 2021, which gives away my junior, the firms, because of COVID, had to hire less people. So if they were taking 15 people, they were probably taking a third. Obviously firm dependent.
Yeah.
At the medium-sized law firms, for example, C&A Friedlander or firms of a similar size, if they were taking, let's say, 5 people, they might have to take between 0 and 3 people. Okay, my year was a bit different. We did have 4, but I don't think that was usual in the circumstances. So if you look at firms who are now even smaller than us, even if it was just slightly smaller, some firms will be taking 0 people because the firm might buckle under the pressure. And so what you find is that the person who's now become a second-year CA almost has to do the first-year CA work too. So they try and fulfill 2 years' roles. So during COVID, it was very tough, I think, for some firms. I know the conveyancing department for some firms really did well to, I wouldn't say carry the litigation department, but the conveyancing did somewhat well. But the intake was quite tricky. And I'm just thinking back to when I was applying, it was very competitive. And I know I only got my approval to go to the firm a couple months before the year ended.
Wow. And so it was you were getting a little bit nervous.
And this is after 6 years of studying.
Wow.
So anyone who has a candidate attorney position in Cape Town, I think they know that they're very blessed.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and like I said to you off camera a minute ago, I'm glad we're talking about this because it's something that we've been looking at. My researchers have been looking at quite a lot, and we're still doing a lot of research on it. And there's a couple of stats that we've got from Law Society and from various other sources that back up what you're saying. There was a report out there recently, and again, I'm going to have to find it and put it in a link, to back up my claim here, that every year in South Africa, there's close to 5,000 people graduating with some type of law qualification in the country. Okay, it's 5,000. It's big, but it's not, it's not the biggest, and obviously this is very specific to South Africa. But according to the Law Society, there is only 1,000 CA positions available every year in the country. And that is where the problem starts. Well, the problem actually starts for me way back with the universities, which we all know are fantastic, and they are businesses, and they need an intake. But, and again, I'm not going to put you on the spot here. This is something that I've said on my podcast. I've said to the universities that I've worked with, namely UCT, UWC, Stellenbosch, Rhodes, and UJ, and WITS. I've said to their law faculties, you guys have got to start preparing some of these guys for the fact that many of them won't be lawyers. But they obviously, the law degree is a fantastic degree, and you can use it in many different business sphere these days. But those numbers just fascinated me.
It is staggering, and I know this is a legal podcast, but this dilemma that you explain is very similar to, I think, what medical students are experiencing, in that you have, if it's 5,000 people graduating with a law degree every year and only 1,000 jobs available, but notwithstanding that, the country still needs more lawyers.
Yeah.
There aren't enough lawyers because legal fees are quite expensive, is quite expensive still in South Africa. And in the medical industry, it's the same. We have all these medical students who are graduating, and not all of them can be placed, but medical costs are still expensive, and not everyone has access to a doctor. It's the exact same thing in South Africa with attorneys.
I think actually going forward, I think I might get my research team to maybe chart it on a map and show, because clearly the jobs and therefore where people flock to is going to be very centralised on the main cities. But to back up what you're saying there is that there's even more need for more legal representation, but you can't force people to go out and live in the middle of the Karoo. Well, I don't know. It's beautiful. But so I find that utterly fascinating, and I think you're right. And just on that topic as well, last year, I don't know if you read this, but I saw it on LinkedIn a couple of times, and there was the LPC came out with a paper about potentially giving CAs a minimum wage.
I did read about it.
And again, I wouldn't put you on the spot necessarily to ask your opinion of that, because that would be unfair of me, but I'll give you my opinion. I looked at it. Now, look, obviously, for me, politically, I'm right down the middle. My dad was a trade unionist, so I grew up in a very socialist household about power to the people, but I work in a very capitalist world. I grew up in London. I lived in Hong Kong for a very long time. So I'm a bit of both. And I can see the benefits sometimes of minimum wages. But as I said on my video that I recorded, I can tell you now, you could chart it with a clever bit of software. That 5,000 people won't stop going down that graduate every year. But if you squeeze the small law firms in this country, many of whom can't afford more than what they're already paying, to pay double, what's going to happen? It's going to be like COVID all over again, where they might typically bring on one CA, they'll just go without, or they'll just they'll use what they existing have. So those 1,000 positions could well be squeezed to 900, 800, 700, 600, because as you point out earlier, it's the bigger firms that can take on a number of people. But interesting one. And I don't want to pick your brains about that too much. But look, you're in the construction litigation space, right?
I am indeed, yeah.
What are you seeing in the construction space at the moment over the last couple of years that you've been in it? Has there been a lot of growth? Is it busy? How are you doing?
I mean, in my experience, we've seen growth. I can't obviously speak for other firms, but during COVID, a lot of construction projects actually came to a halt, and so that did bring a lot of projects to a halt, and that did have an effect on the practice to some degree. But in other respects, it caused a lot of drama between, for example, contractors, subcontractors, employers, and that in and of itself brought new matters. My brother's a civil engineer, working for a firm, and they found that unfortunately through corruption and that sort of stuff, it led to him leaving the country.
That's a
to
shame.
work abroad in another country where construction is very big. But as construction attorneys, we've been doing quite well. And yeah, I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I've often over my long career been asked why, when I started in recruitment and then carried on, why I chose the law market. And one of the answers I often give is because it's fairly recession proof. It's, if things are going well, then there's lots of deals coming in, and commercial teams grow, mergers and acquisitions teams grow, and then if things are going badly, then the litigators are starting to shine.
So that's that's the thing. I mean, you only really see your attorney when things start going south. I think a lot of clients come into an attorney the same as them paying their premiums for insurance. You don't
Or going to the dentist.
Yeah, it's a grudge purchase. You don't really see the need for it until things go south, and it's the same with attorneys. Oftentimes, when we consult with someone and they present the mess that's unfolded, we realize usually they bring a contract, whether it's a JBCC agreement in a construction matter. We go through what's happened, almost like a chronology of events, and very quickly you can identify where the issue originated. And had they consulted an attorney at the time that they were making those sort of commercial decisions, the dispute that unfolded could have very easily been prevented.
I think that if any of your colleagues across South Africa listen to this, they're going to be sitting there nodding their head at the moment. I think one of the things I've learned in business is actually to involve your attorney as early as possible, because and get them to draw up the agreements, because you start protecting yourself from the beginning and get them a lot closer. And like I say, I think many of your colleagues will be sitting there going, yes, the earlier you can get the lawyers involved, the better it is. But yeah, I can imagine as well, actually, during COVID, when especially big construction projects, when they told us all to go indoors. I mean, I'm assuming that some of the people who are on the hook for big expenses were sitting there going, right, where's my litigation team? We need someone to fight this for us. But sorry.
There's standing costs, costs that you have to pay on a daily basis. There's the age-old dispute in construction. Usually it comes down to delay. Who caused the delay? And you can have massive arbitrations or adjudications or high court disputes where people are pointing fingers at one another to say who was the first person that caused delay that was critical to the project. And you'd be surprised how many people it can take to figure that out.
And how long it can take.
And how long it takes to figure out who caused the delay.
Yeah, exactly. There's a delay going on right now, guys. Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's interesting. And funny enough, it was something that I was talking to about with one of my new data analysts the other day in the office, who hasn't come to us from a legal background. She's come to us from a financial investment management background. And I was explaining to her, well, obviously not as eloquently as you put it there, but in terms of how a dispute will arise around a big construction project. Typically, once it's all handed over, that's when the litigation starts. It's okay, you cost me an extra $1 million, I want that back, and then the fighting starts. But it's they'll still do business with each other, going forward.
I think what's almost unfortunate in the construction industry is that you have the JBCC agreement, which is like a sense of the Bible in construction law, and they're very technical, overly technical, very complicated, and oftentimes the people who are dealing with these JBCC agreements aren't legally trained for obvious reasons. These are contractors, they're builders, they're engineers, they're architects, they're quantity surveyors. They aren't legally trained. And when it comes time for the matter to proceed, oftentimes what they do on the ground, what I'm trying to say is when the project proceeds, the way that they undergo that project is not necessarily in terms of the provisions of the JBCC agreement. They do what makes the most sense. And you can't blame them for that.
No.
You do what's most convenient, most pragmatic, most commercially sensible and sound, but that's not usually in terms of the agreement. And so one party will then refer the matter to, for example, arbitration, or they'll declare a dispute, and then it becomes he said, she said, and then the emotions go through the roof. And then you get the attorney in the room, and then you try to figure out what happened, and then you go to the JBCC and you say, well, did you follow provisions 1, 2, 3, and 4? And then they say, but why on earth would I follow those provisions? Because this is how we've been doing it since the beginning of the project. And now you start trying to prove tacit agreements that even though this is what the written agreement said, which says you can't vary the terms of the agreement, this is, as a matter of fact, this is how the project proceeded. And now you have a whole big fight about that.
Yeah, I can imagine. And obviously, once it gets into, hopefully, avoiding court, but if it gets into court, then, the law's the law, isn't it? And the contract is the contract. And often, and I'm not saying necessarily this happens all the time, but sometimes common sense doesn't prevail. It really just comes down to fact. So, but look, I mean, again, this might be an unfair question because I know you're sort of deep into it, in terms of the construction industry. But how is your firm feeling about construction across Cape Town and Joburg? I mean, whenever I drive around, especially in Joburg, even in Cape Town and further out, there's a lot going on. I mean, there's a lot of area to build, and there's a lot of commercial buildings going up. You need to drive down towards Stellenbosch, and you see new buildings popping up all over the place. The West Coast with commercial housing, private residencies going up. And are you seeing quite a lot of growth in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very blessed to work in a construction litigation department that's very busy. My director, Jonathan Williams, for the last probably midway through last year, we've seen unprecedented growth. I can't really explain why that is.
Because you're good.
But I mean, just over the last couple of months, it's just been growing and growing and growing, both for personal matters, for people who have residential houses that they're building, and big construction developments that are being built. I can't really explain why that's happening, but we've become very, very busy. It could be through referral, but it's difficult to explain because that almost the hangover of COVID, I think, has come to an end. I think a lot of people might disagree, but I think when there was a dispute during the COVID period, many of those disputes started to unfold right there and then, and continued for a few years after that. But I do feel like we've moved into a new era now where people aren't really talking about COVID in the construction industry. I think a lot of people might disagree with that,
really
but
good to hear.
But when new matters are coming to us now, they're never saying during 2020 and 2021 this happened, and so we now have this issue. We're not getting that. We got matters that are unfolding from months ago.
That's really good to hear as well, yeah. Because I think we're all, I mean, we all really want, everybody in the world wants to banish COVID. Did that really happen? No, it's interesting. I think, one thing we all know in this room and anybody listening is that there's nothing quite as resilient as a South African economy and the South African people. I think it's, someone wrote in the Daily Investor the other day, it was about, I think, our friend Davy Ruert, who is like the least bullish person on South Africa ever, was going on about another recession. And I just looked at it and thought, I've been here 7 years. I think we've been in a permanent recession, but business still goes on. And I think the linking that back to construction and big projects, which is, as everybody knows, a huge industry for South Africa, a huge employer, huge revenues being generated, not just for the law firms, but for, obviously, the construction businesses and banks and everybody, is that it's common sense. If you think that the country's going to go back into lockdown, or if there's going to be something that's going to upset your delivery, you're not going to start it, are you? But now there seems to be that little bit of comfort that when probably that's not going to happen again, hopefully, touch wood, and therefore you've got a bit more, like I say, tie that in with that resilience when it comes to the economy, that companies are still doing well, they want to employ, they want to build. Yes, the litigation is always going to come out of massive projects, not just construction, but any massive project. There's always a need for litigation. But it's good to hear that the commercial side of things is still building, still growing, and still going.
Very much.
As well.
I mean, I do think South Africans are very resilient. And a lot of clients that come to us, even if their matters aren't particularly big quantum-wise, a lot of them are litigating on principle. And that's
again,
a very
South
big
African
thing.
business people are very principled, and I like that. They're very like, no, you said.
Or if they say, this person stuck it to me, they want to stick it back. They don't want to allow someone to pull the wool over their eyes. And so they're happy to go the full 9 miles just to show that they, in fact, were right from the beginning.
Yeah.
And as an attorney, you have to respect that. You do advise that perhaps you shouldn't proceed, but then they said, no, we want to proceed in principle. We understand that, we respect that, and, we act under their instructions.
Yeah. Sometimes, not that I've had cause to need, thankfully, touch wood, an attorney too often, but on the odd occasion that I have, the good ones will often tell me, like, if you do that, it's going to cost you a lot of money. I go, okay, that's not. Then we'll leave it. But no, it's good to hear that things are growing, and I think that ties in very, very nicely with the summit that C&A Friedlander are kindly supporting us on and sponsoring, which I'm delighted about. And as I said to you just off camera, C&A Friedlander is the only Cape Town law firm that is sponsoring, as in we have other law firms sponsoring, but they will be flying in from Joburg, and obviously delighted to have them on board as well. But, the fact that it's here, it's in our home, or rather your home, I'm a guest here, but I'm delighted that the firm's involved. And for those of you out there that are listening to this and don't know what I'm talking about, the General Council, the GC Summit, is a series that is a global series. This year we'll see London, Dubai, Singapore. There's 2 in India. There's Australia, New Zealand, and this is the first time that it's come to the African continent. We're doing it in conjunction with the owners of the summit, which is Law Ninjas, a fantastic network of lawyers across the world. And of course, when they brought it to us, I said, of course this will work here. Of course, but I insisted on 2 things. I said, it has to be Pan-Africa. It has to be focusing on not just on South Africa, but also the every inch of this wonderful continent, and how business is growing and how law is supporting that. And then the second thing I insisted on is that it is in the beautiful city of Cape Town, because this is the best place on the continent, as we know.
I mean, no place like Cape Town, but I'm very excited for C&A Friedlander to be at the GC Summit. I didn't know we were the only Cape Town law firm. That's quite strange. There are a lot of brilliant firms in Cape Town, but C&A Friedlander is very excited to go and meet a whole lot of people from around the world.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different people coming. There's some high in-house council members who will be joining. There's executive. There, top dogs in leading industries around the world that are coming to Cape Town for the summit for a couple of days in February, and it's a brilliant networking experience.
Yeah.
To chat to people who are like-minded, similar interests, similar thoughts, similar phases of their life, even people who aren't in similar phases of their life, maybe different levels of the corporate ladder. They all come with their different ideas.
Yeah.
And that's going to, I can almost guarantee that's going to bring some very interesting opportunities and new doors to be opened in the months and years to come. And I think with these sort of summits, you think, well, no one really popped me an email a few months after the summit. So they might think, well, was it worth it? Absolutely. Because that email will come.
Oh, yes.
And it only takes one connection.
Oh, yes.
To smash the door right open. It takes one connection, and that's it.
Completely agree with you. And again, I know that C&A Friedlander as a firm and the other sponsors are going to get a huge amount out of it. One of the reasons, because, and again, I can speak frankly, because as part owner of the event, is that I've sponsored myself many events globally. I've spoken at events, whether it's law or whether it's in recruitment or whether it's consulting, whatever it might be. And I've seen where the value comes. The value comes in tangible connections with business leaders, people who are at that board level, people who are making decisions. And in addition to that, it has to be topics that are relevant to them. It has to be something that people are going to get. I've said it when we first started organizing it. If we want people to come to fly in It has to be something worth getting on that plane for. So the topics are there's a myriad of topics being discussed over 2 days, but it's it's the great and the good. It's the top 350 in-house lawyers from across the continent talking about Africa's future, the future of business and law in Africa, how the role that General Counsel plays in that. And the law firms that are sponsoring and supporting, which is, C&A Friedlander and others, which is fantastic, will be there discussing this with them and what role that relationship between the law firms and the business will play going forward, not just in South Africa, but in Egypt and Morocco and Kenya and Nigeria and Ghana and Botswana and a variety of other countries that are all flying in, and from the Middle East and from India, and that we've got people flying in from the UK and Australia as well. So, and all opened by our dear mayor as well, Jordan Hill-Lewis, who has kindly agreed to open the summit. But again, those of you who are listening to this from Cape Town will understand the hard work that Jordan and his team are putting in for the city. They have a vision for the city that is to be the leading city from a business perspective and from a sustainability perspective on the continent of Africa. So I'm hoping that he sort of kickstarts the conversation on the Thursday very well. So, look, it's obviously we've got to let you get back to work, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you in the studio, Michael. I'm sure now that we're into it, we could probably sit here and talk all day. But I want to thank you for your time, and thank you to you and to C&A Friedlander for taking part in the summit.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you for the opportunity. We're very excited for the GC Summit next month, and we look forward to partnering with you. I'm sure we'll see you on stage. I don't know if you speak in or
yes,
if you've got a slot. Yeah. We're very excited to see you there, and we'll stay in touch.
Good man. Thanks a lot.
So I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you onto the podcast. If you work in the legal profession and you think that you are doing something different across the African continent, get in touch with us. Find us on any of our social media accounts, drop us a line, we'll get in touch. We can film in studio, we can film online. It'll be great to talk to you.